what happens to every single member of the original 7 Deadly Sins in the Four Knights of the Apocalypse sequel? Who's alive? Who's dead? Who's stronger than before? Who has kids and how many? All of these questions and more will be answered in this video as I break down the ultimate fate of every original 7 Deadly Sins member in the sequel. You guys know the drill. If you enjoy my 7 Deadly Sins and Four Knights of the Apocalypse videos, leave a quick like and comment for that YouTube algorithm. And of course, the best way to show me that you want to see more of these videos is to subscribe right now and hit that notification bell to turn on all notifications. Whenever I have a video where a lot of people subscribe on that video, I know they want to see more of this type of content, and that is exactly what I give them. Okay, so even though the sequel focuses on the Four Knights of the Apocalypse, most of the original 7 Deadly Sins members have already made an appearance in the sequel, and we learned a lot of interesting things about their new lives. The first sin to return in the Four Knights of the Apocalypse is the goat's sin of lust, Gowther, who reveals himself in chapter 39. At some point after the ending of the original manga, Gowther decided to make his home in a mountain range called Dalflare, which is located in southern Britannia. Here in the mountains in the middle of nowhere, he established a village for a group of demons who had deserted during the Holy War because they didn't want to fight or hurt anyone. Now, even though these demons willingly risked their lives to desert the Demon King's armies because they didn't want to harm humans, they were still greatly feared and hated by humans just because of who they were and how they looked. Humans tend to see all demons as universally evil, and they are not likely to question whether these particular demons were actually pacifists during the last war. So, in order to protect the demons from potential human attacks, Gowther created a magical barrier that surrounded the village and made all the demons inside the village appear as if they were humans. To any outsiders who might be passing by, this would look like a perfectly normal village populated by perfectly normal people. And Gowther disguised his own appearance as well, taking on the identity of the village elder. When our heroes arrive to the village, Sin, aka Lancelot in disguise, figures out who the elder really is, and eventually the elder reveals himself to the others. Gowther introduces himself as one of the 7 Deadly Sins, the so-called sworn enemies of King Arthur. Gowther decided that he would help the pacifist demons who are essentially refugees from the demon realm, but who are feared and hated by everyone in the human realm, and so he established this village and helped to keep everyone safe. Gowther ends up playing an important role in pacifying the main antagonist of this arc, a man called Ardberg. After that, Gowther senses that 2 spears infused with magic are flying right at them, and they seem to be targeting Percival. Gowther is able to save Percival using an epic acrobatic maneuver, but after Gowther takes Percival out of harm's way, the second spear is heading straight for Anne. Ardberg, who is reminded of his own daughter when he looks at Anne, ends up sacrificing his life to save her. This arc in which Gowther is revealed actually had a lot of depth because it really stressed the point that sometimes in life things are not black and white. The fact that some demons did horrible things doesn't mean that they're all bad, and in fact some even risked their own lives to avoid hurting others. Needless to say, anyone caught deserting from the Demon King's army would have been punished extremely harshly, so the fact that these demons still risked their lives to do that speaks to their character. And this arc also showed us that even an antagonist can be a good person who is just misguided, and someone who can redeem himself in the end. At the end of this arc, our heroes continue on their journey to Leonis while Gowther remains inside the demon village. However, Gowther does return to the story once again during the Camelot infiltration arc, which takes place some 90 chapters later, and also after a 2-year time skip. During a fight in which Anne and Donnie take on a holy knight of Camelot called Beltripe, Gowther suddenly shows up and creates an illusion that tricks the knight into thinking that he successfully killed Anne and Donnie. Gowther reveals himself and explains that he was sent to Camelot by Meliodas in order to support the infiltration, but he's been keeping a low profile and using magic to conceal his presence until now. Even though Gowther is one of the 7 Deadly Sins, the Holy Knight of Camelot proves himself to be extremely powerful, and he even manages to cut off one of Gowther's arms and one of his legs. Gowther and the rest of the heroes then enter a chaos hole in order to escape the Holy Knight. Anne is worried that Gowther might die because of his injuries, but he explains that he is a doll and that he will be fine. Thetis, who is the reincarnation of Derriere, will be able to repair him. Actually, the fact that he is a doll is what allowed Gowther to infiltrate Camelot in the first place, because all the non-human clans have been blocked from entering Arthur's fantastical human-only utopia. Our heroes have to move quickly so they're not spotted by the Holy Knight again, and Donnie carries Gothar because it's hard for him to walk without an arm and a leg. Gothar says this reminds him of when the good guys retook the capital in the Holy War from 18 years ago, and how Hauser gave him a ride when he was hurt. The heroes then find themselves in the territory of another Holy Knight of Camelot and another one of the four evils, Pelegard. But instead of attacking them, Pelegard says that he just wants to talk to them. It turns out that Pelegard is actually a decent guy who decided to side with King Arthur only for the sake of his wife, who desperately needs Camelot and the comforting illusions it offers. When other knights of Camelot who are pursuing our heroes locate them in Pelegard's territory, Pelegard pretends that he is hunting them too. But in reality, Pelegard and Gothar secretly team up to make the other knights think that our heroes were killed, when in reality they teleported back to Britannia with the help of Gothar's magic, Pelegard's flame attack diversion, and Thetis's portal. In the end, everyone wins. The other knights of Camelot believe that Pelegard is still loyal to Arthur, and Gothar and the rest of our heroes return to Britannia safely. During this arc, we learn from Thetis that Ban recently made a visit to the Palace of Leonis, and King and Diane, who are living in the fairy realm, have also been informed about the current situation in Britannia and Camelot. Gothar then agrees to pay a visit to the palace himself, but before we talk about Ban, King, Diane, and the others, we gotta go back and talk about Meliodas, the current king of Leonis. King Meliodas makes his first appearance in chapter 51 of the Four Knights of the Apocalypse. The first time we see Meliodas, he meets Percival on the streets of Leonis and instructs him to deliver some crates to the Boar Hat Bar, which is now permanently located in Leonis. At first, Percival thinks that Meliodas is just some young kid his age who works at the Boar Hat, and when Meliodas offers him some Boar Hat special pudding, Percival foolishly accepts. When he wakes up, Meliodas reveals that he knew Percival's grandpa, and that while he is the tavern keeper of the Boar Hat, he is also the current king of Leonis. Percival laughs and doesn't believe it because, again, he thinks Meliodas is just a kid his age. But Meliodas says that he's actually much older than him, and as we know, he is more than 3,000 years older, but Meliodas doesn't get into specifics. Percival has a ton of questions for the king, but Meliodas decides to show him around Leonis first and promises to answer the questions once the four knights are all gathered in one place. I can't get into all the details of their journey through the capital, but it includes some really cool updates on what a bunch of side characters from the original series are up to now. Percival is especially impressed by the fact that there are giants and fairies living peacefully alongside the humans in Leonis. And Meliodas explains that they all became close allies after the last Holy War. When Percival asks whether there are any demons here, Meliodas asks what kind of weirdo would want to live with demons, which is just classic Meliodas. Percival says that some demons are actually good, like the ones in Dalflair, and Percival is then surprised to learn that Meliodas speaks the language of the demons. Meliodas tells Percival that they need his help, because huge chunks of Britannia have started disappearing into thin air, and at this rate the entire land will be consumed by this magical void. Meliodas says that the Four Knights of Prophecy will be the ones who will save the world from this plight, which kind of confuses Percival since he always heard that they were the Four Knights of the Apocalypse who would destroy the world. But it all depends on your perspective. As we eventually learn, chunks of Britannia are disappearing because Camelot is stealing them in order to sustain itself. If the Four Knights save Britannia, then they will be dooming Camelot at the same time, so they will be both saviors and destroyers by the end of the story. Meliodas wants to gather all four knights in one place and speak to them, but when he returns to the castle, his guard tells him that the fourth knight, the one that we hadn't met up to this point, has disappeared. Meliodas says that Lancelot will find the last knight, and then he goes to visit an elderly and bedridden Bartra. Bartra was the one who predicted the arrival of the four knights, but he also warned Meliodas that the four knights will be threatened by a chaos assassin and the sword of a traitor. Later, Leonis is attacked by a revived Galand and Melascula wielding chaos power. Meliodas concludes that this attack is a diversion designed to distract from something happening inside the castle, and he thinks that Arthur's target might be Bartra, so he rushes to protect the former king. But the real target wasn't the former king, it was an imprisoned spy whom Arthur wanted to get rid of before he could reveal how to get to Camelot. We then learn that Jericho is fighting on the side of Camelot, she is the one who ultimately took out the spy, and the reason why she sided with Arthur is by far the worst twist in the history of the 7 Deadly Sins, so let's never talk about it again, okay guys? Cool. Anyway, eventually Arthur himself shows up on the main battlefield, and he engages in a fight with Prince Tristan. Tristan normally likes to only use the goddess side of his powers, but that is not enough to defeat Arthur, so he is forced to tap into his demon powers as well. This makes him stronger, but it also makes him lose control and go berserk, which leads him to taking too many risks. Meliodas tells Arthur that he has gone down the wrong path, but he and the other Sins are still determined to bring him to his senses and to be there to support him when he does snap out of this insanity. However, Arthur says that he has never been more sane, and that he has concluded that the only way to protect the human race in the long term is to eliminate all the other races from the world. Meliodas then prepares to do battle with Arthur, and he tells Tristan to stay out of it. Unfortunately, Tristan's demon powers make him rash and irresponsible, and he refuses to stay out. Tristan foolishly rushes out in front of Arthur and nearly loses his head, but Meliodas saves his son's life by getting in between Arthur and Tristan. Even after this, Tristan refuses to stay out of the fight, and he actually gets mad at his father. Arthur tells Tristan that he's only dragging Meliodas down in this battle. Meliodas can't concentrate on defeating Arthur because he has to focus on keeping his son from getting himself killed. Tristan then gives in to his anger and loses control over his body. Meliodas tries to calm his son down, and Arthur takes advantage of the situation by attacking. As Meliodas protects Tristan with his own body, he takes a massive slice to the back from Arthur's sword, which injures him severely. Meliodas manages to get his son out of danger, but after sustaining several grave injuries in the process, he can no longer fight effectively. Thankfully, that is when Lancelot shows up and takes on Arthur in Meliodas' place. An intense battle commences, and an injured Meliodas does interfere in the battle again when Arthur frees the power of chaos from his severed arm. Lancelot proves himself to be extremely strong in this fight, and Arthur ends up withdrawing when the Holy Knights of Camelot arrive and advise him to leave. They can sense extreme hostile intent from 3 different directions. The directions of Gother, Ban, and also King Indian, and so leaving right away is the best course of action because if all the Sins converge on this spot to fight Arthur, he will be defeated. Arthur leaves but vows to eradicate the 4 knights, the 7 deadly sins, and all of their allies. Meliodas shows up again the day after the big battle against Arthur, and he invites Percival and all his friends for an audience at the royal castle. There they are welcomed by both Meliodas and Elizabeth doesn't look a day older than she did 16 years ago, and you can also see the goddess marks in her eyes. After Elizabeth offers her sincere thanks to Percival and his friends for helping to protect the kingdom of Leonis, Meliodas ruins the moment by vigorously groping his wife in front of everyone. This proves once again that Meliodas hasn't changed one bit in these 16 years. He is the same old Meliodas from before. Hilariously, Anne, who hasn't met him yet, thinks he's just some pervy kid who decided to harass the queen. The reveal that this is actually Meliodas completely shatters Anne's idea of what Meliodas would be like, because she thought that he was like this big buff handsome monarch like the one in the old wanted posters of Meliodas that we saw at the very beginning of the original story. Meliodas thanks everyone for their brave efforts, and then he tells them that it's time to say goodbye. Percival's friends think that they now have to say goodbye to him because as one of the 4 knights, he is going to continue on the journey on his own. But Meliodas informs them that they will all be saying goodbye to their old lives, because from now on, all of Percival's friends will be named Holy Knights, and they will form the Percival Platoon. This means that they get to accompany Percival on his journey. Meliodas also tells them that as the King of Leonis, he is counting on all of them to save Britannia. Meliodas leads the Percival platoon to the war room where Lancelot, Tristan, the final knight of the apocalypse, Gawain, and the Tristan platoon are all waiting. Now that the 4 knights of prophecy are gathered in one place, Meliodas explains that they really will destroy the world, but not the world of Britannia. They will destroy the false world of Camelot and save Britannia from the evil King Arthur. As I said before, whenever Arthur creates something new in Camelot, something is torn from the real world, so if Camelot continues to grow, Britannia will be destroyed. Meliodas then reveals why he could never go to Camelot to fight Arthur himself, and why he has to rely on the 4 knights to do it for him. As a demon, Meliodas is incapable of entering Camelot, because Arthur has created a powerful barrier that prevents every race except humans from entering. But since all of the 4 knights are either human or half human, they will all be able to enter Camelot and destroy it from the inside. At night, Meliodas has a private conversation with Gawain in which he explains that the clothing she wears are important and possess unique magic, including the ability to fit the changing size of her body and to withstand the power of her OP magic. The clothes were likely designed by Merlin herself, and they are quite interesting because the top looks exactly like Merlin's clothes, while the pants look like something Escanor would wear. I'm sure that Gawain has a unique connection to Escanor and Merlin that is yet to be revealed, but we don't get that reveal now because Meliodas then proceeds to give Gawain food poisoning with his special pudding, which delays the departure of the 4 knights by a whole day. Classic Meliodas. So, the morning after Gawain spends a whole day on the toilet, Meliodas gathers the 4 knights and their allies at the palace once again. He instructs them to find a way to enter Camelot no matter what it takes, because the only way to stop Arthur's destruction of Britannia is to defeat him in Camelot. Meliodas instructs the 10 of them to split up into 3 different teams. Since they don't know how to gain access to Camelot, they will cover more ground by splitting up and searching different parts of Britannia. He gives them magical orbs that they can use to report any major updates to the others, and when they find solid leads, Thetis will use her magic to bring them all together again. The first team includes Percival and Gawain, as well as Anne, Nasienz, and Dani from the Percival platoon. They will venture into the Fairy King's forest. The second team includes Tristan and the Tristan platoon, and they will journey to South Britannia. Meanwhile, Lancelot will form the final team by himself, and he will travel to the kingdom of Benwick, where his father Bon and mother Elaine rule as king and queen. For his part, Meliodas will look for Dubs, the legendary craftsman of the Giant Clan. He is of course the one who made the Coffin of Eternal Darkness and the sacred treasures of the 7 deadly sins. He is the best craftsman in the history of Britannia, and Meliodas wants him to forge a special weapon for Lancelot. Right now, there is no weapon in existence that can withstand Lancelot's sheer magical force, and that is why whenever he uses a weapon in combination with magic, the weapon bursts into tiny fragments. Meliodas tells everyone that they will find many dangers on their journey, but they will also find old allies of the 7 deadly sins such as Matrona, Jenna and Zaneri, and Gerheade. Percival's allies advise him to give Dragon Handle back to Meliodas because if it gets into the wrong hands, it could be used to seal Meliodas away. But Meliodas just smiles and tells Percival to keep it. He says that he has faith in Percival and that he is happy to put his fate in Percival's hands. This surprises but also inspires everyone, especially Percival. As the 4 knights and their allies prepare to leave, both Meliodas and Elizabeth say a heartwarming farewell to their son, Tristan. After they all depart, Meliodas and Elizabeth have a private conversation. Meliodas says that he must be a terrible father to send his own young son on such a dangerous mission, and he thinks that Tristan will probably hate him even more from now on. But Elizabeth says that Tristan doesn't hate him at all. In fact, he looks up to Meliodas more than anyone else. Meliodas acts like this is all news to him, but Elizabeth assures him that Tristan will be fine because he is the son of Meliodas of the 7 deadly sins and the protector of Leonis. When Elizabeth notices that Meliodas seems more worried than usual, he tells her that he received word from Lancelot that the Princess of Cameliard has gone missing. He is talking about Guinevere, who has even more powerful prophetic abilities than Bartra. A clearly concerned Meliodas says that if such a power is now in the hands of Camelot, a big storm will be coming soon. Next up, let's talk about the Fox's sin of greed, Bon, who was directly mentioned in the series multiple times up to this point as the king of a kingdom called Benwick, where he lives with his queen Elaine. But he doesn't officially appear in the sequel until chapter 129. This chapter starts off in an ominous way, with the above-mentioned Guinevere having a vision of Leonis being attacked by Arthur and his knights. Meliodas, Bon, Gother, King, and Diane are all there fighting, and at one point it looks like Bon has been severely injured and maybe even killed. Guinevere wakes up from her dream screaming, and she is sweaty and clearly upset. She says that they can't allow that future to come true, and she wonders where Lancelot is right now and what he is doing. Guinevere, of course, knows that Lancelot is the son of Bon, and she also apparently has a huge crush on Lancelot and believes that the two of them will one day be married. We then get a 2-year time skip, and we jump to a settlement in northern Britannia. We see a bunch of Chaos Knights telling the residents to join them in Camelot and to take their land with them. The residents refuse, and they demand that the knights return the land that they already took against their wishes, including a river that was very important to them. The people try to fight back, but they stand no chance against the Knights of Camelot. It's looking very bad for these residents of Northern Britannia until Bon himself suddenly shows up and takes on the Knights. The Knights are shocked to see one of the legendary 7 deadly sins in a place like this in the middle of nowhere. They attempt to fight Bon, but he absolutely wrecks them easily with his sacred treasure. Holy Knight Ironside asks Bon how he has been tracking the Holy Knights of Camelot, but Bon explains that he wasn't tracking them at all, it was just a coincidence. He came to Vanya to drink their famous ale, and the Knights just happened to be very close by, and that's how he saw them. Bon is grateful that he ran into Ironside and the other Knights, because up to this point they've been working from the shadows and they've been doing their best to avoid the 7 deadly sins. Ironside explains that Arthur forbade his Knights to engage the 7 deadly sins directly, but Ironside himself doesn't like that order, and he thinks that he can actually take Bon. Ironside uses his high-level elemental powers to attack Bon, and for like a second it seems as if Bon might have been killed. The residents who are watching the fight start freaking out, but when the dust from Ironside's attack settles, it turns out that Bon is of course completely fine. He doesn't even have a scratch on him. Ironside is shocked and he asks Bon, "What kind of a monster are you?" Bon replies that Ironside is the only monster around here, and then he leaps towards Ironside, easily breaking through his defenses. Bon says that connected by blood or not, Ironside casually tried to kill the boy he once called his son, that boy being Percival. That is not something that any human would do, only a monster. Bon goes on to say that his own son finally returned to him in Elaine 2 years ago, so right before the time skip. But he would barely look at his parents and he just holed up alone in his room and cried by himself. Even as a child, Lancelot was really strong and he never cried, but now he kept crying about how he failed to protect his dear friend, Percival. For those of you who need a reminder, right before the 2-year time skip, Percival had seemingly died. His magic disappeared completely and he was basically comatose and refusing to wake up. This absolutely devastated all of his friends, including Lancelot. Furious, Bon kicks Ironside right in the gut with a clear message. Here's one from him to you. At that point, the Knights of Camelot retreat in a panic and Bon opens a bottle of ale and starts downing it. Then he says, "Why don't I go drink with the gang for a change?" Implying that he is finally going to go and meet up with the other 7 deadly sins. That is all we've gotten from Bon in the sequel so far. But we also learned that for the 6 years that Lancelot was missing following the events of chapter 346.5, Bon and Elaine continued to search for him and Jericho relentlessly. Even after Lancelot thankfully returned, they still wanted him to try to find Jericho and bring her back to Benwick. But again, let's never talk about why Jericho didn't return and decided to join King Arthur instead. Never. Now it's time to check in with the Grizzly Sin of Sloth King and the Serpent Sin of Envy Diane, who play a prominent role in the Fairy Realm arc, which spans from chapter 138 to chapter 153 in the sequel manga. So after the end of the original series, King and Diane, who are of course married, are now living in the Fairy Realm. King is the Fairy King and Diane is the Giant Queen, and they are living together with their 7 children. They actually have 7 biological children and 1 adopted child, but one of their biological children went missing at birth and only returned to them during this very arc. I won't get into all the spoilers and details here, but if you want to know the breakdown of all of their children and the different powers that their children possess, I will link a video that explains every Sin's kids in great detail. Link will be in the description and also on screen at the end of this video. After Percival becomes comatose, Nascience takes him to the Fairy Realm in an attempt to find a magical cure, and he stays there for 2 years. During this arc, it is revealed that the eldest child of King and Diane, Myrtle, is actually a normal human who was the victim of a changeling. A changeling took King and Diane's biological eldest child and replaced that child with a human baby. King and Diane did their best to find their missing biological child, but they still adopted Myrtle and treated him as one of their own, despite the fact that he was a human who actually has a tough time living inside the Fairy Realm and has to take magical pills just to function properly. During this arc, the eldest child of Diane and King is finally revealed and returns to them, bringing their overall kid count to 8. The main conflict in this arc comes when some of King Arthur's henchmen infiltrate the Fairy Realm, and they take advantage of Myrtle's jealousy and insecurity to trick him into making a deal with them. In return for allegedly curing the illness that prevented him from functioning properly inside the Fairy Realm, Myrtle agreed to work together with Arthur's henchmen, but the deal, of course, backfired. Myrtle was unable to handle the power that was given to him, and he goes berserk and even attacks his own family. Diane eventually steps in and faces him head on, but even though Myrtle seriously attacks his adoptive mother Diane, she refuses to hit him back, or to even defend herself. Instead of fighting, she hugs him, and she tells him that even though their family was the victim of a changeling, King and her both accepted Myrtle as their own, and they love him as their own son. They even stopped trying to find his real family because they decided that they couldn't give him up because they loved him so much. When he sees and hears all of this, Myrtle finally breaks down and returns to normal. He cries and apologizes, and he says that he just wants them all to be a real family. This is exactly what King and Diane want too, as well as all the other children, and so the family finally reconciles. But as all of this is happening, King and one of the other children were fighting Arthur's henchmen. King is affected by a curse and is forced to return to his older, nerfed form, the one where he doesn't have his wings yet. But even though he is temporarily nerfed, together with Diane, King bravely fights against the rest of Arthur's men, even bringing out his spirit spear Chastaful. Not gonna lie, seeing Chastaful again brought back a lot of memories from the original 7 Deadly Sins manga. King and Diane and their family end up getting pretty injured during this fight, but they win out in the end, and then they are healed by Percival, who suddenly wakes up and uses his OP healing magic to heal them. At the very end of the arc, Arthur's henchmen fall, and King and Diane remain inside the fairy realm as Naciens and Percival continue their quest to stop the evil King Arthur. Now let's talk about the boar's sin of lust, Merlin, whose fate is the most mysterious out of all the sins, and who has basically been used as clickbait by the author before he slapped us with a massive twist regarding Merlin's true fate. At the end of the original series, Merlin returned to Camelot with Arthur, back when Arthur was still a good guy. Their goal was to somehow rebuild the destroyed kingdom of Camelot, and they were hoping to use Arthur's newly acquired chaos power to do it. Then, after the original series ended, all of the survivors of Camelot seemingly disappeared from Britannia, including Merlin and Arthur. We now know that this happened because Arthur decided to use the power of chaos to rebuild Camelot in a different dimension. When the sequel started, for a long time we believed that Merlin was still by Arthur's side and helping him rebuild Camelot, since we literally saw her standing beside him in his castle in Camelot, and sometimes even talking to him. She was shown beside him several times, although she usually said very little and she seemed very withdrawn. This of course is quite different from the Merlin we know, and many of us were suspicious about what was really going on here. Why would Merlin support what Arthur is doing when he is clearly evil now? Why was she just standing around and indulging his fancies instead of doing something and being her usual self? It is only in chapter 91 that we finally get the answer. When Guinevere is brought to Camelot, she realizes right away that the Merlin standing beside Arthur is a fake, and she mocks Arthur for being so in love with Merlin that he has to create fakes to replace the real thing. What a simp. Arthur then becomes enraged and kills Merlin, revealing that she was just a fairy who used her transformation magic to make herself look like Merlin. Arthur says that he had almost convinced himself that she was real, but now Guinevere has ruined it. This was a pretty shocking twist if you were reading the manga weekly, and it tells us that even though the real Merlin was still by Arthur's side when the original series ended, and we do think she really wanted to rebuild Camelot with him, at some point the two of them clearly parted ways. We don't know whether Merlin abandoned him because she didn't support his evil plan, or whether Arthur did something bad to her, like kill her or seal her away, so she couldn't get in his way. Personally, I think she is alive and that she will show up again eventually, and hopefully Nakaba the author will have a good reason for why she has been MIA for all this time. What do you guys think? Where is Merlin and what has she been up to all this time? Did she just go somewhere to research magic and maybe find a way to separate Arthur from chaos power? Or did something bad happen to her? Let me know down in the comments below. Finally, we have to talk about the one, the only, the lion's sin of pride, Escanor. We know that in the original series, Escanor died heroically during the fight against the Demon King, and before he died, he and Merlin shared that powerful kiss goodbye that left her face scarred from that point onward. Sadly, Escanor has stayed dead in the sequel, but there is a caveat. One of the four Knights of the Apocalypse, Gawain, possesses a power that is extremely similar to Escanor's Sunshine, even though she refers to it as Dawn. She also refers to herself as the Master of the Sun, and when she uses her power, her attitude, cockiness, and other elements of her personality become very similar to those of Escanor. Gawain also has the ability to use overpowered magic like teleportation and absolute cancel, and she wears a top that is extremely similar to Merlin's, while, as I said before, her belt and pants could easily have belonged to Escanor. Gawain is of course the Knight of Famine, and of course if you look at the silhouette that we get of the Knight of Famine in the prophecy, you could see that it could easily be the silhouette of Escanor. Finally, she even uses a weapon called Sacred Sword Rita, a clear reference to Escanor's divine axe Rita. Although all of this hasn't been explained yet, there is clearly some sort of strong connection between Gawain and Escanor, and probably between Gawain and Merlin. Some have theorized that Gawain may be a literal reincarnation of Escanor, and that her power is literally just sunshine reincarnated into the new body. Others have claimed that Gawain could be the daughter of Merlin and Escanor. Now, I don't know if Merlin and Escanor were up to some stuff behind the scenes that we didn't see before Escanor died, but it's also possible that Merlin could create an artificial child using her OP magic and intentionally give the child both her magic and Escanor's magic. Oh, and Tristan's horse is also named Escanor, so there is technically an Escanor in the sequel, even if Gawain doesn't turn out to be the literal reincarnation of the Master of the Sun. Don't forget to check out my video where I break down all the kids of the 7 deadly sins and their unique powers and abilities, link on screen and in the description. And if you want to see more 7 deadly sins and 4 Knights of the Apocalypse videos here on the channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to turn on all notifications. When I look at my YouTube analytics and I see that a certain video is getting a lot of subscribers, then I know that you guys want to see more of this type of content, and that is exactly what I'm going to deliver.